They say true evil often wears the plainest of masks. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, later known as the Butcher of Rostov, was not a man of imposing stature or dark charisma. He was awkward, gray, unremarkable, almost invisible in the crowded trains and bleak streets of Soviet Russia. Yet behind his glasses and his timid demeanor lurked a predator who committed some of the most horrific murders in modern history. From 1978 to 1990, across the twilight years of the Soviet Union, Chikatilo claimed at least 52 lives, children, teenagers, women, slaughtered with such sadistic brutality that his crimes shook a nation already trembling on the edge of collapse. To understand the horror of Chikatilo's reign, one must step back into the atmosphere of his world, the Soviet Union of the late 20th century, a land forged in revolution and hardened by decades of war, famine, and repression. By the 1970s and 80s, it was a society of shortages and secrets. Food was rationed, consumer goods were scarce, and travel was tightly controlled. But perhaps the most suffocating shortage was that of truth itself. The party line dictated reality, and anything that did not fit, especially something as shameful as a serial killer, was denied, silenced, buried. Soviet criminology officially claimed that serial murder was a capitalist disease, a symptom of decadent Western societies. In the USSR, such evil could not exist. And so, when whispers of mutilated bodies began to spread around Rostov, officials brushed them off, even as corpses piled up. This denial would become the very cloak that shielded Chikatilo as he hunted, again and again. Andrei's own origins were steeped in darkness. He was born in 1936, in a Ukrainian village devastated by the Holodomor, the man-made famine that starved millions. Stories whispered in his family told of a brother kidnapped and eaten by desperate neighbors, though whether this was true or family folklore remains uncertain. What is certain is that Andrei grew up with hunger as a constant companion, with war tearing across his homeland and with shame etched into his very being. By adolescence, he suffered from chronic impotence, an affliction that would define his life. He felt small, weak, mocked by women, unworthy of respect. This inner storm of inadequacy fermented over decades, turning into a corrosive rage that would one day erupt in blood. In public, however, Chikatilo wore the mask of a dutiful Soviet citizen. He studied, became a schoolteacher, married, had children. Neighbors described him as quiet, if somewhat odd. He was never truly liked, but neither was he feared. Yet behind closed doors, his frustrations grew. He prowled public baths and dormitories, secretly exposing himself, groping women on buses, luring children with promises of sweets or small gifts. Each time he risked exposure, but Soviet institutions often chose to look the other way. Complaints were dismissed and small crimes were buried in bureaucracy. It was as though the system itself was conspiring to keep his darkness hidden until it was too late. His first known murder came in December 1978, when he lured 9-year-old Yelena Zakotnova into an abandoned house. He attempted to rape her but failed. In his frustration, he stabbed and strangled her, discovering in that moment that killing brought him the release and twisted satisfaction his impotence denied him. He disposed of her body in a river. Astonishingly, another man was wrongfully accused, convicted and executed for Yelena's murder. This miscarriage of justice not only claimed an innocent life, but emboldened Chikatilo. He had killed, and the system had shielded him. The realization was intoxicating. He had found his secret formula for power. For years after, he hunted sporadically. His victims were often the vulnerable, runaways, orphans, students stranded at train stations, lonely women searching for companionship. The Soviet Union of the 1980s was filled with such lost souls, easy prey for a man like him. He lured them with promises of food, money, or simply a walk. In the woods, the fields, or the wastelands near Rostov, he would unleash his sadism, stabbing, slashing, mutilating. Many victims were left with their eyes gouged out, a detail that horrified investigators. Some speculated he believed the eyes could record his image, a superstition that exposed the twisted workings of his mind. Others saw it as sheer cruelty, a compulsion to disfigure and destroy. By 1982, the bodies were appearing with chilling regularity. The authorities, forced at last to admit something terrible was happening, launched one of the largest criminal investigations in Soviet history. A task force of hundreds scoured forests and train stations, yet the investigation was hampered by politics. Officials refused to admit publicly that a serial killer was at large, so citizens remained largely uninformed and unprepared. Newspapers were forbidden from printing warnings. Meanwhile, investigators faced immense pressure to produce results. At least one man falsely confessed under torture. Others were arrested and later released. The real killer remained free. Chikatilo, in his anonymity, thrived. He blended in perfectly. A middle-aged, bespectacled man with a shabby suit and a teacher's manner. He seemed harmless, even pitiable. Who would suspect him of being a sadistic butcher? And yet he killed with increasing frenzy, sometimes multiple victims within weeks. His crimes became more grotesque, his confidence swelling. It was as if each murder confirmed his invincibility. But investigators slowly were learning. They began to apply psychological profiling, a concept new to Soviet policing. A young psychiatrist, Dr. Alexander Buchanovsky, prepared a profile that described the killer as a repressed, impotent, middle-aged man, likely educated, likely struggling with sexual dysfunction. It was eerily precise. Andrei Chikatilo fit the description almost perfectly. In 1984, he was arrested in connection with the murders. Evidence was circumstantial, and the system, still reluctant to admit the scale of the crimes, released him. For a time, he lay dormant, but his compulsions could not be contained. By the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union itself unraveled, his killings surged again. The chaos of perestroika and the breakdown of state control created the perfect storm for his predation. Rostov's forests drank more blood. Finally, in 1990, his luck ran out. Under surveillance at a train station, he was observed attempting to approach children and behaving suspiciously. Police stopped him, searched his belongings, and found incriminating items: ropes, knives. With mounting evidence linking him to the murders, he was taken into custody. At first, Chikatilo resisted. He denied everything, mocked the investigators, but under prolonged interrogation and confronted with the psychological insights of Dr. Buchanovsky, he began to break. What followed was a confession that stunned even the most hardened detectives. In chilling detail, he described dozens of murders, how he lured his victims, how he killed them, and how he derived satisfaction from the blood and terror. He admitted to gouging out eyes, to stabbing over and over, to acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. His confessions filled volumes. The trial in 1992 was unlike anything the Soviet public had seen. In a courtroom packed with journalists, survivors, and grieving families, Andrei Chikatilo sat in a large iron cage, a symbolic protection for the court from the monster within. He ranted, screamed, exposed himself, mocked the proceedings, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. Families of victims wept as details of his crimes were read aloud. The world watched in horror, aghast at the sheer scale of his brutality. The sentence was inevitable: death. In 1994, he was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head. His final words, if any, were lost to history. But his crimes remain, etched into the memory of Russia as one of its darkest chapters. Andrei Chikatilo's story is not just one of personal evil. It is also a story about a society that refused to see, that silenced the truth, and that allowed a monster to thrive in its shadows. He was a predator, yes, but he was also a symptom of a system built on secrecy and denial. The question that lingers, decades later, is unsettling. Would he have been stopped sooner if the truth had not been so dangerous to speak? The forests of Rostov are quieter now, but their soil still holds the echoes of his crimes. The Butcher of Rostov is gone, but the dread he inspired lives on, as a warning that monsters are not born only in dark corners of the world. Sometimes they hide in plain sight behind glasses, a teacher's smile, and the silence of an entire society. Don't forget, subscribe to Crimson Narratives for more chilling stories from the dark corridors of history. Because these stories remind us, evil often looks ordinary until it reveals its true face.